Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
All right. So I wrote an article this past week, and I didn't think it would go as viral as it went. And I was not attempting to make anything viral. I just was writing about something that was heavy on my heart. And the title of the blog post, you can find it on my website, is SBC's Caring Well Stance on Abusers Coddles Them While Keeping Them Hidden Within the Church. So I was writing about the Caring Well curriculum, and we did an episode before on lesson number 10, which is how to care for, I forget how they say it, how to care for abusers or something like that. Some ridiculous nonsense.
I remember very well us talking about that, Jimmy. And yeah, it's the verbiage isn't quite what you said. But
well, it's not just the verbiage; it's the actual application of it. Right. So, and it's the theology behind it. And you know, it's such a shame because I listened to the previous lessons, and there were some things that I found to be, I'm going to be brutally honest when I critique this. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to pick, but, you know, as far as presentation, a lot of it was really boring and dry. As far as content, I thought it was pretty decent. The first 9 lessons, and I would say especially Rachel Denhollander and Diane Langberg, they were just top notch. Both in content and in presentation.
They
I mean,
are,
really good. I mean, their stance and their grasp on abusers and how dangerous they are, how unrepentant they can be, how important it is for the church to communicate and warn people about them, I thought was just really good. I don't think there's anything that either one of those said that I would disagree with, unless I was just being a butt and, you know, trying to nitpick. But I thought they did a superb job. And then I got to lesson 10, and it infuriated me. And so I hadn't really looked at the list of resources until just last week. And I don't even know what made me get back on, but I logged back on this Caring Well curriculum, and I looked at lesson 12, and all it is a list of resources. And there was one that was titled, let me get the title for this so I don't mess it up. It's the third resource down under follow-up resources, and the title is Article, Registered Sex Offender, A Sample Church Membership and Attendance Policy by Brad Hambrick. So Brad is one of the ones who presented throughout this, and I was pretty unimpressed with his information. And that, just the title of that article caught my attention, so I clicked on it and I read it, and lo and behold, it's a sample policy at none other than J.D. Greer's church, the Summit Church. So J.D. Greer is the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and in my mind, I would think somebody who is the president of the SBC and who is driving this movement and standing behind it and has the authority to stand behind it and to make it work really well ought to have a good policy at his church.
They should have a top-notch policy.
It should be the best policy, especially if you're listing it as a top resource for the Caring Well curriculum.
Right.
If this is a sample policy and your hope for the Caring Well curriculum is to train all these pastors and all these church leaders for how to safeguard against abusers and how to care well for the abused, you should have the best policy in place. And I read it and I just got infuriated. Not only was it bad, it's dangerous. It coddles the abuser. And I'm going to read some of the stuff. I don't want to rehash everything that's in that blog post that I wrote, because if you really want to read my thoughts on it, you can go back and read that. But I want to start with this caveat, and I think this is really important. I've been hearing back from some people, and they're like, "Oh, well, you know, you're saying that all abusers are wolves." No, I'm not. I think, we've talked about this before on this podcast. I think especially with registered sex offenders, not all of them are child predators. Not all of them are predators. There are some registered sex offenders who are on the registry who, were a couple years older, a few years older than their girlfriend. And in their state, and those laws vary dramatically from state to state. In their state, some states it's only a 2-year age difference, and that's statutory rape. Even if it's consensual, even if they're boyfriend, girlfriend, it doesn't matter. In some states say that there cannot be consent when the child, quote unquote, child is a minor. So, in some instances, you have a 17-year-old with a 19 or 20-year-old boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And then you have parents who get mad or whatever. A student thinks it's funny to report that. And then they're on the registry.
And you have a disaster. Right.
So, clearly,
right.
I'm not saying that all registered sex offenders are wolves and, and are predators and they're raping kids and all this stuff. I would not make that argument because it's just illogical. However, I will say that the majority of registered sex offenders are predatory abusers. Whether they've preyed on children or whether they've preyed on adults, the majority of them are predator-type abusers, and they will offend again. The problem that I have with Brad Hambrick's policy is that the very first word is friend, and it's written as a letter to the registered sex offender. So it starts out, a friend. And in my mind, maybe this is just me reading into it too much, but I'm like, no, the first word should say abuser, comma. Right? Because it's what they are. It's what they did. And
I know there are people, Jimmy,
they're not our friends.
Cringe at that, but
that's okay.
Right.
I don't mind.
Right. And clearly, I think you prefaced by stating, your stand or our stand on not all sex offenders are predators. There are some by the logic of the law, like you have a 17 and a 19-year-old dating and something happens, mom and dad get angry, turn them in, and then you have suddenly a criminal by that state's law. We're talking about actual these predators who have violated young children mostly, and have done great harm by violating them. They're not nice people, those actions.
And they don't do nice things.
Right. They don't do nice things. And they are not our friend. So
right.
I get it,
yeah.
what you're saying. They are not our friend.
But this, this term, this is another thing, and I highlighted in the actual policy. I put the actual policy up in full on my blog, and I highlighted all the places where I thought they were just really problematic. But the one sentence in the very first paragraph, as a church, we want to be a safe place for everyone to learn about Christ and the gospel. Well, I speak enough church talk that I know how to interpret that. What they mean is we want this to be a place where literally everybody is welcome and everybody is safe to worship here, and everybody is free to, not be harassed and not be picked on and those sorts of things. And what they don't understand is that there's a very clear theology in the Bible that makes a distinction between sheep and wolves. Now, I will say, too, one of the problems with this and one of the criticisms that people will come back to me on is, well, you know, if you're just this person out there who's sniffing around looking for wolves, then there are people out there who are going to be labeling everybody a wolf. You know, grandma sitting in the second pew back, she's going to be labeled a wolf. That's a fair criticism. I think that's fair. I think there are people out there who wrongly are so quick to label people as wolves when they're not wolves. And that's why that episode that we did on the fruits of a wolf is really helpful for people, because you have to use your brain. Right. You have to look at the scriptures and let it define who the wolves are, not based on who you think is a wolf or who you feel is a wolf. But the Bible gives really objective criteria, and it lays out who the wolves are. You know, they're not people who just preach a false gospel, you know, and they're just kind of ignorant and bumbling people who are going around preaching wrong things and, you know, that sort of thing. The Bible is pretty clear. There are people who they masquerade, they pretend to be righteous when they're not, but they don't just pretend to be righteous. They do it in order to oppress people. They do it in order to harm people, inflict real serious, devastating, long-lasting harm on people. They know exactly what they're doing. It's not accidental. They didn't slip up, mess up. They didn't fall into sin. They know exactly what they're doing. It's very meticulous. It's very calculated. Those are wolves, and the Bible lays that out.
I'll just interject quickly. Again, I think for the average person, unless you've been in a position where you've experienced harm from a wolf, you're not totally going to get it, because we don't want to get it. We don't want to believe that there are people who very in a planned out and in a masterful way, calculated way, want to devour. They want to harm. They want to destroy people, good people.
Well, especially when they're actually attending, and you see this, you know, nice old man with the gray hair, and he's just sitting there minding his own business, and he's smiling, and he's raising his hands to Jesus, and he just looks so connected to God. And that's what people see on the outside. And what they don't realize, unless you know abusers really well, that's all part of the show. And I've read accounts and I've spoken with abusers who talk about it in very, very, very lengthy detail, where they say, that's all show. Like, we're putting on this facade because all you have to do is raise your hands a little bit and have the appearance of being righteous, and people buy into it. They believe it.
There's a clear picture that comes to mind of a podcast we did probably a good year ago, where the wolf is among the sheep. And do you remember where that was? It was a YouTube video, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That picture has burned on my mind. It has been the best teaching tool for me.
Yeah, because they blend in with the sheep, and the sheep are just grazing, and they're hanging, and the wolf is like 5 feet from them.
Totally unaware that they're about to be devoured.
Yeah.
So this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. So, you know, just walking through this policy, it lists the 3 priorities. I need to blow this up. My eyesight's really bad. There we go. I'm looking at my computer here, and I turned 40 this year. I'm an old geezer. My eyes are falling apart.
I was going to say that, but I just figured I'd let you say it.
I know. That ages you, huh?
Only the bifocals know. Yeah.
The pages that follow explain policies we have in place to balance 3 priorities we have. Number 1, the safety of children. Number 2, peace of mind for parents. I'll get into that later, too. Peace of mind for parents. Number 3, opportunities to worship and fellowship for everyone, including those under registered sex offender status. So what's absent from that, and I pointed that out in the blog, is it doesn't say that they place as a priority survivors of abuse who are sitting in the pews, which makes up At a bare minimum, very, very conservatively, 25% of the church is made up of sex abuse survivors they have experienced abuse multiple times at the hands of at least an abuser, but oftentimes many abusers.
And again, that's hard for some people to wrap their minds around unless you watch, listen, and pay attention to just the daily news anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers are just staggering of those who have been abused and who suffer from the after effects.
Yeah, it's long-lasting effects. Yeah. It never goes away. And if you have a church who's doing this kind of crap, it's so hurtful and it's so damaging because they're seeking refuge. They're looking for a place where they're going to feel safe and they're going to feel validated. They're going to be seen. I think it's interesting, and we've talked about this before, the many times that Jesus says, like the simple woman who's washing his feet with her hair. She's a prostitute. She comes in unannounced, uninvited. She's on her hands and knees, just so humiliating. And she's snotting and tearing all over his feet, grinding her hair into his feet. And Jesus, knowing what Simon's thinking, he turns and he looks at the woman, saying to Simon, so he's looking at the woman, but he's speaking to Simon. He says, "Simon, do you see her?" Mm-hmm. For me, that's such a gripping, powerful, emotional scene that's painted in the Gospel of Luke. Because what Jesus isn't saying is, do you see her? He's saying, do you see this woman? Do you see her for who she is? Look at her right now. Look at what she's doing. She's absolutely,
look at her heart,
covered in shame and humiliation because of what's been done to her. She's on her hands and knees, wiping my feet with her hair. Do you see her? And
tears. Yeah.
And abuse survivors are looking for that kind of Jesus within the church. And instead what they get is this next paragraph in this policy. We recognize, remember, this is a letter that's written to abusers. We recognize that wrestling with the consequences of past actions can be emotionally difficult. We want to reiterate throughout this process that you are offered full forgiveness because of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. We do not want you to live with a sense of shame. This is to the abuser they're talking to. Insanity. This is insanity. This is embarrassing. If I were J.D. Greear, I'd be embarrassed of this policy. I'd rip it up, throw it in the trash. I'd apologize that my church had such a policy. And I'd say, we can do better.
Oh, amen.
This is horrific. If you're an abuse survivor in the church and you hear this kind of stuff, none of this language is present in this policy about survivors, that we don't want you to live with a sense of shame. That's who they ought to be saying this to, not the people who destroyed their lives. So, it goes on, and next couple paragraphs down, we value their insight. That is the abuser. We value their insight on how, or no. Sorry, let me start with the first sentence. First, we ask that you sign a release of information with each person in your rehabilitative care or legal accountability team to speak with us about your progress. We value their insight on how to best care for you. I thought that's ironic, because never in the Bible do you find this kind of compassion and care for oppressors and abusers. How to best care for... Jesus didn't walk around looking for abusers saying, we're going to find how to best care for you. We're going to assemble a team. Can you imagine if survivors had teams assembled for them to care for them? This policy is embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for them.
It is.
It's so infuriating. And I don't think I'm exaggerating here.
And I get what's trying to be done. It's the voice of today's world. We will accept and love everyone. And
everyone's welcome.
Yes,
no matter what you've done.
Everyone will be welcome. It is each individual's burden to forgive everyone and everyone of anything. And I feel like that is the most oppressive burden that can be placed on our
And it's not biblical.
No, not at all.
It's over and over and over and over again.
So much grief and just heartache to feel that the abused person is the one who has to be the person who's doing the forgiving and welcoming.
That's right. The burden falls on them.
Yes,
you better
yes.
forgive. And by the way, your abuser, or whether it's your abuser or somebody else's abuser,
Right.
doesn't matter. Abusers are going to get a care team. We're going to assemble a care team for them because we value their input.
And
we want to find out how they can best care for you,
it's
friend.
all backwards. Backwards.
This sentence here, you can attend services where children are present. It flat out says, you can attend services where children are present, period. Oh, no, sorry, comma. I have it highlighted so it looked like the end of a sentence. It's not. I'll read the full sentence. You can attend services where children are present, comma, such as worship services, provided that one of your shepherding individuals is present. So the irony in this is you can attend worship services where there are kids, as long as you have a shepherding person there. However, then they go on and say you're not allowed to be around children, anywhere near children, in the children's wing. I'm like, does that make sense to you?
No, it's such a contrasting idea. And I see what I see clearly. We want you to be here where there are adults because we know we're going to be watching you. But Jimmy, you've taught time and time again, abuse in plain sight is done over and over
Absolutely.
and over again. And it's a challenge.
They revel in the daylight.
Right.
Peter says that. 2 Peter 2, they revel in the daylight while they feast with you.
Why would the church, number one, want to place an abuser in a situation in the assembly with children?
Right. It makes no sense.
Zero sense.
If that's their crime.
Zero. Right.
And we're talking about sex offenders whose crimes are against children.
Right.
Again, this is not all sex offenders. You have to have a case-by-case policy, and that's what this policy is, just a blanket policy for all sex offenders. And it's just dangerous. It's so dangerous because it lumps them all together, and they're like these blubbering, weeping people who are crying over the sex offenders, saying how magnificent it is that you're here. By the way, we're going to keep your presence a secret. That's written into this policy. Yeah,
that makes me cringe.
Let's see. They get to hand select with some of the elders. They get to hand select who their care team is. Because here, I'm reading, quote, we want them to be people that you know, trust, and like. So the abuser gets a say in who the people are who are watching over his care team. And I wrote in the blog post, and I was so angry at this point. I was like, "Isn't that cute?" This just infuriates me. Okay, now listen to this. This blew my blood pressure through the roof, and I already have high blood pressure thanks to you. I know, I'm fired up. This fires me up.
I know that.
Here, listen to this sentence. We ask that one of these individuals be with you whenever you are at a summit service or event. This person would greet you when you arrived at a summit service or event. At a discreet location. This is reckless. They come in at a discreet location. It's all about for your care. Secrecy, for that word, that phrase, for your care. I have it highlighted here in another paragraph. A summit elder will be placed over your care and ensure that this policy is followed. So they get to come in at a discreet location. They check in via an app. Now listen to this one. If your blood pressure is not up now, I'm telling you, you need to be sitting down for this. In function, again, reading verbatim. In function, these individuals should be viewed as a supportive friend. We want to identify people you would be doing life with at Summit anyway, and make that more intentional. Socially, there would be nothing to draw attention to this shepherding arrangement. Again, the church is kept in the dark. And how do I know? I'm not jumping to conclusions. Here's what it says. Listen to this. I promise you, the church is kept in the dark. FAQ, frequently asked question. Who should know about this arrangement and agreement? Or who would know? My eyes are really bad. I really need to blow that up.
Get new glasses.
I know,
Jimmy.
this is crazy.
Yeah.
Who would know about this arrangement and agreement? Listen to this. Those who would know about this arrangement are the pastors of the Summit Church, the lay elders at your campus, campus security teams, and the point person or persons over the children and student ministries at your campus. Not the people in the children's ministries, not the teachers, not the volunteers, just the point person or persons. So those are the ones who know about this agreement, period.
It's a protection for the abuser.
The church doesn't know.
Mm-mm.
And this one made me angry too. Now I'm really messing this up. I keep messing with the size of it, and I'm losing my place. I told you I'm an old geezer. Technology, how do you work this computer? This one. Why is this needed? How is this loving? This is a form, listen, this is a form of protection for you.
What did I just say? I said
this is a form of protection. This is talking to the abuser. And provides peace of mind to the families in our church. Well, how does it provide peace of mind for the families in the church if they don't even know about it? The only ones who know about this agreement are some of the leaders, right. Not even all of them.
I think that the peace of mind that's inferred is what you don't know. You don't
exactly
need to know,
right. That's exactly right.
What you don't know, you don't need to know.
So,
why stir the pot?
So we the leaders have this handled.
Have it taken care of.
Yep. We have it. We have a policy for sex offenders, registered sex offenders at Summit Church. You're on a need to know basis. By the way, you don't need to know.
Right.
And the leaders have this taken care of, and we're keeping an eye on the sex offenders. You can rest easy now. You and your children are safe.
It's terrible.
If the members only knew what was in this piece of garbage.
Terrible.
It's a highly secretive document, a highly secretive agreement between the leaders and the sex offender where they drool all over them. They just think they're the best thing. I mean, that's the way I can't read this any other way. I've read it 100 times and I can't read it any other way. So then it provides peace of mind to the families in our church. For you, this ensures if any accusations were to emerge that we would have someone with you who could give testimony to where you were and what you were doing. This is a pedophile's dream because they know how to abuse in plain sight. Can you imagine Larry Nassar? We're going to keep somebody within eyesight, not beside you, but just within eyesight. We're not going to tell any of your patients that you're a predator.
Terrible.
We're not going to tell any of the patient's parents that you're a predator. This is exactly what USA Gymnastics did. They knew about it. They knew that Larry Nassar, for decades, they knew he was a predator. There had been so many kids who had reported, and Rachel Dan Hollander spells that out in her book. Victim after victim had reported him. USAG Gymnastics knew about it, and they didn't tell anybody. And they didn't even put somebody to, quote-unquote, keep an eye on him, but it didn't matter because he abused the victims in front of their parents anyway.
Right.
That's what abusers do. So this policy, this is for your protection. Families will have peace of mind because, and you will too, because if any accusation occurs, we can come back and we'll back you up. We have your back. That's what they're saying. We have your back. We've got your wink, wink. We've got your back.
We have you covered. So don't.
This is insanity. This is reckless. So reckless. Mm-hmm. So then it goes on. So yeah, families have peace of mind, and then it goes on and it says we're asking families to sacrifice peace of mind. Well, that's confusing, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
This policy gives them peace of mind. Oh, it's all flowers and butterflies. And then we're asking families to sacrifice peace of mind that would be present if we did not allow anyone under registered sex offender status to attend. So in other words, you'll have families would have peace of mind if we just didn't allow registered sex offenders to come here. So we're asking families to sacrifice that peace of mind so that you can be here, friend. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
No.
This is reckless and dangerous. So I mean, I could spend a long time on this. Go read the blog if you want your blood pressure to continue to rise. J.D. Greear, you can do better than this. This is insane. You can do much better than this. So there were some people asking me, several people have been saying, well, does Grace stand behind this? Is this what they're training? I'm a certification specialist for Grace. However, I must say emphatically, I am not a representative of Grace. In other words, I can think on my own. This is not Grace telling me what to think and how to shape my policies. I stand behind Grace completely. But I am not representing Grace by saying this. Nobody from Grace has ever contacted me and said, would you go on your podcast and back us up? Never. Nor would I ever do that if anybody did ask me to do that. So I want to put that little disclaimer in there.
Right.
So I will say this, as a certification specialist with Grace, I imagine, I haven't spoken with Boz or with Mike Sloan over at Grace, but I imagine they're probably, if they've read my article by now, they're probably have steam coming out of their ears too at the dangerous recklessness of this policy at J.D. Greear's church. And I'll say this too. I'm going to quote directly from Boz Chividjan's and Shira Berkovitz's book. I know both Boz and Shira. I don't know Shira well, but I know Shira. I've spoken with her a little bit. But they wrote this excellent book, The Child Safeguarding Policy Guide for Churches and Ministries. Excellent resource. Boz says this about these non-disclosure agreements, limited access agreements, which is, I said non-disclosure subconsciously because it's basically what it is. Shh, we're going to keep this a secret. But this policy at Summit Church that Caringwell is endorsing and listing as a resource is what's known as a limited access agreement. So it means the person with whom you have this agreement with has limited access with individuals at the church. You're going to limit their access to individuals. Okay, so fancy name for it, limited access agreement. So in the book, Boz and Shira have a sample policy of a limited access agreement. So on first thought, and I know from experience, some churches are using this as agreements with registered sex offenders. They're pulling it completely out of context. They don't even read this paragraph. And I want Boz to do a revision on this. So I'm going to put in that recommendation to do a revision and put this in all capitals and underline it and put it in bold, this sentence right here, talking about limited access agreements. They do not apply to known offenders or church staff members. These limited access agreements are not for sex offenders or staff members who are accused credibly of abuse. And then he goes on and says, if a convicted offender wants to join, and the sample they gave was Faith Church, if they want to join Faith Church community, we will contact our Grace certification specialist or equivalent child protection expert on how to best interact with a known sex offender. Similarly, if an individual has been credibly accused of child sex abuse or any form of child maltreatment, but has not yet or was not convicted, we will contact our Grace certification specialist or equivalent child protection expert on how to best proceed. If a staff member violates the policy, they will be formally warned and then will be fired if the violation occurs again. So these limited access agreements, the one that I read from Summit Church, J.D. Greear's church, those are not for sex offenders.
No.
You never have a limited access agreement with a sex offender. Those are for people who violate boundaries, and you don't know that they're an abuser. There's no credible allegation that would indicate that they're an abuser.
Give an example.
An example that somebody comes up and there's a 16-year-old girl who's real bubbly and, just outspoken and fun
Happy.
and
Okay.
happy.
Yep.
And there's a guy who's 25 years old, and he comes in and starts rubbing her shoulders.
I was going to say he's very touchy-feely.
Yeah.
And we know some.
Or gives her, constantly hugging and
massage on the shoulders.
So, that's something that is, it's not reportable. It's not a reportable incident. Right. It's creepy. It's weird. It's inappropriate, but probably it's a 25-year-old who doesn't have good boundaries. But it could be an abuser. You just don't know. It's not a reportable incident.
Right. Okay.
But somebody sees him do that. That's when this limited access agreement would
I think you
come
needed
into play.
To clarify that.
Sure.
That's a great example.
So that limited access agreement would say, we witnessed you violate a boundary. Mm-hmm. It was not sexual harassment. Right. You didn't come up and you didn't see her wince and cringe. She was like, she was laughing and giggling or whatever. Not that that's okay. Right. I'm not saying that that's okay behavior at all. Right. But I'm saying that is not a reportable incident, because you have to meet the threshold of reasonable suspicion that he is sexually abusing that minor. You would initiate a limited access agreement where now you have this person sign a contract. You spell out all these boundaries, saying that we're going to have a person sit beside you, and we have to keep an eye on you. We have to do this, and this. So this is not for somebody who's convicted or credibly accused of abuse.
Right.
Somebody who's been convicted, who's actually committed crimes against children, or somebody who's credibly accused is in a whole different ballpark.
And should be.
Right. Where the limited access agreements come into play and where they're really helpful is when you have people who are just dense. And I'm not trying to be offensive here. Some people just don't have good boundaries. They were never taught good boundaries. Doesn't mean that they're a predator. Doesn't mean that they're seeking people out to abuse.
I can think of an example. When a girl is walking down the sidewalk and you got the construction worker and he's whistling.
And a cat call.
The cat call whistling. Or when a girl walks by, it could be in a store, in a business, whatever, and a guy just gives a smack on the butt. That's not acceptable, but it's not
at all.
Right. But is that a sex offender? Most likely, it's a person with really stupid judgment. Mm-hmm. Stupid.
Depending on who it is and what circumstance. The slap on the butt ups the ante a lot, because that crosses the line of sexual harassment. That is a chargeable offense. That would be one where that person, if we saw somebody slap somebody on the bottom at our church, they'd be gone in a heartbeat. There would be no limited access agreement with them. They'd be gone. Okay. So you have to think through this, and there's not this blanket policy, and especially this one that Brad Hambrick, I assume that he wrote it. The one at Summit Church, you can't have this blanket policy that swoons all over all registered sex offenders and says, come on in, and by the way, we're going to keep your presence here a secret. That's just unacceptable. It's dangerous, it's reckless, and it communicates a very loud message to survivors that we're going to maintain secrecy here. You're on a need-to-know basis, and you don't need to know. We have our friend over here who we've assembled a care team for. Meanwhile, the survivor gets nothing. They don't have care teams. I have yet to find a survivor who's come back to me and said, my church assembled a care team for me. Maybe there are some out there who have. I've not heard of one. And I've been doing this for 8 years. I've not heard one survivor ever come to me and say, my church rallied around me and they provided a care team and let me hand select who I wanted on that care team to be doing life with.
Instead, what we hear is more and more of abuse survivors leaving the confines of the church because of stuff like this.
Right.
Because they're entering a hazardous, dangerous place.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting to me that policy is pretty much a megaphone to abusers.
Come here.
Yeah.
You'll be hidden. You'll be well taken care
we're
of.
Going to take care of you.
Absolutely.
And if there's any question that comes up,
we got your back.
We have you covered.
Because we have somebody was quote unquote keeping an eye on you, and we'll back you up.
Think that policy through.
What they're saying too, and I think this is implied too. They're not just saying that we have your back if there are any accusations here at church. They're saying we have your back if this ever goes to court.
That's a good
we have
point.
this contractual agreement that says we had somebody keeping an eye on you, and we will vouch for you. This is frightening. This is a reckless policy.
That's very scary.
This is a reckless, dangerous policy. And if I were at Summit Church, if there are any members there who are listening to this or who have read my blog, you need to be on the megaphone, and you need to be going to JD Greer directly and saying, how is this policy okay at this church? And he better be willing to address that, not because I said so, but because I think it's scary, it's frightening, this is going to perpetuate abuse. This is an abuser's dream. So anyway, I one of the things that people are asking, I see in some of the comments online, well, that's fine. You want to criticize this policy, but what's a good policy look like? So I plan on writing a follow-up blog because I think that's a good question. I think that's a fair question.
It's an excellent question.
And I would like to outline in my next blog post, and we'll probably do a podcast as well, outlining what a good policy is regarding sex offenders, because the reality is they're going to be knocking on doors and they're going to be coming into churches, or at least trying to. So what do we do about that? How do we best protect the sheep, and how do we identify the wolves, and how do we get rid of them? How do we keep them at bay? How do we keep them away? And how do we develop policies that reflect that in a fair way that doesn't just say, well, you abuse somebody, so you're gone forever. I think we have to use really good criteria and really evaluate and assess this properly. So anyway, that'll be a follow-up blog and podcast. But yeah, the truth bomb is this. If you are at a church right now, ask them what their policy is regarding sex offenders. Just ask them. And ask them if there are any registered sex offenders in the church. And if they're unwilling to tell you, and if they're unwilling to share their policy with you, dig your heels in. My gut reaction would say run from that church. I would say no, dig your heels in and offer to help them and say, I will help you develop a policy, but this isn't okay. This is not okay to keep it a secret and to allow them to flourish inside of the church. That's your Truth Bomb. Thank you for tuning into this episode. We'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcast, or Stitcher. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.